Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Wellbeing with Seamus. My name is Seamus Corey, and if you've not seen my podcast or heard my podcast or subscribed to my podcast or followed my podcast, Wellbeing with Seamus is all about well-being. It's all about looking at well-being, asking questions around well-being, talking about well-being, and sharing well-being journeys with those who have been on well-being journeys. It's listening to their stories. It's getting advice, guidance, bits of tidbits that we can use in our own lives to improve our well-being. And ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I can't believe I'm saying this, but we're on episode 9 of our well-being podcast this afternoon, which is absolutely brilliant. So thank you ever so much for all those who follow, all those who subscribe to my podcast, all those who's listening from all over the world. I don't know who you are, I don't know where you're from, but thank you from the bottom of my heart for your continued support of this podcast series. If you've not already subscribed and if you've not already followed, I really would recommend and advise you connect with this podcast this afternoon, because ladies and gentlemen, I have an absolute wonderful individual to speak to this afternoon who's kindly shared an hour of his life to come on my podcast and share his own story with you. Not his own story, but actually his own book, because he's written a book about his own journey and about his own story and his own experiences. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you today Dr. David Hamilton, PhD, who I kind of have decided to recall kindfulness ambassador. He's the master of kindfulness. He's written a book around kindness, and I am grateful for his presence this afternoon. And my podcast is honoured by your presence. Welcome to Wellbeing with Seamus, Dr. David Hamilton.
Thanks very much, Seamus. That's a really lovely, kind, sweet introduction. I really appreciate that. It's really great to be here. First of all, thank you for inviting me onto your podcast. I'm very grateful to be here.
I chanced my arm, David, because I know how busy you are, and you're such an accomplished author that to have you here today with me on my podcast, honestly, you honor me today. You absolutely honor this podcast, and you honor me personally, and I really appreciate your time. For those who may not know anything about Dr. David Hamilton, I'd like you maybe just to begin by sharing a little bit of who you are with our listenership this afternoon, David, if you don't mind.
Sure. So before I started writing books, I was a research and development scientist. I used to build drugs for cardiovascular disease and cancer. So I primarily worked in cardiovascular medicine. Now, my PhD is in something called organic chemistry, which, Seamus, has nothing to do, unfortunately, with organic food. Organic chemistry is just the name you give for a research scientist who's an adult but who plays with Lego blocks. But instead of using plastic building blocks, we use atomic building blocks. So a child's green block is my carbon, their yellow block is my hydrogen, their blue block is my nitrogen. But the idea is exactly the same, just like a child might join these blocks together to make a building, for example. So an organic chemist would join our blocks together to make medicines. So I primarily focused on cardiovascular and cancer. But what got me into the field that I'm in now was really just a fascination with the placebo effect. You know, I saw it time and time again in trials, in medical trials, that a number of people who would receive a fake version of the drug, you know, for comparison purposes, would show some improvement. And it was always just assumed that it's, you know, there's nothing in it. And I thought, well, there has to be. So I always had an interest because my mum had postnatal depression when I was a kid after my youngest sister was born. And my mum found through a book that I found in the library that helped her. My mum learned a lot of mind-body techniques. So I was already interested as a child in all this kind of stuff. So when I began to, as a mini side project while I was a research and development scientist, I began to study and understand the placebo effect and really broadly speaking, how it is that things that you feel or things that you imagine or believe
Mm.
can actually have a very powerful health-giving effect.
Mm.
And that really that eventually, after a few books, it led me into exploring kindness and compassion, because it turns out some of the most powerful, potent, and meaningful effects on our health in the brain and the body come through feelings associated with the experience of kindness, whether you're the giver or the receiver of that kindness, or even, Seamus, whether you're the witness to that kindness. So that's really how I got into the subject I specialize in these days.
Oh, David, what a story! What a background story! And
No,
uh,
thanks.
uh, to those of you who have not bought this book yet, you're missing out. This is Dr. David Hamilton's latest volume on his work in terms of the kindness field, and it's called "The Joy of Actually Giving." F smiley face CK. And for those who read it, you will begin to understand the power that lies within this book. Because if you ever wanted to read a book that really explains the power of kindness in today's world, and we live in a world of real polar opposites at the moment, where kindfulness and kindness is very hard to find sometimes. This book will show you how it's possible to generate kindness in your own life, to generate kindness around you, but also be that placebo or ripple effect for others, which in turn changes you, changes the people around you, and changes the communities in which you live. It's a powerful work, David, and I congratulate you on this book.
Well, thanks, Seamus.
As somebody who has tried to practice kindness in his own life for many years, I relate to an awful lot of topics in this book. And your book has actually spoken to me in terms of how relatable kindness is in our
Mm,
own lives, but
yeah.
also the little things that we can do, the little things that we can do to make ourselves feel a little bit better.
Mm,
And in so doing, we make others feel better as well.
yeah.
Tell me, tell me about the genesis of kindness. Where did that start for you? I know you mentioned something of your early life, but when did your first experience of somebody being kind to you or you being kind to somebody else suddenly strike a chord with you and saying, there's something in this?
Do you know what it was, Seamus? I'm glad I've never been asked that question actually before. Interestingly, I remember being emotionally moved by my mum's kindness when I
Hmm.
was a child. I
Hmm.
mean, when you're a kid growing up, you experience the kindness, but you don't intellectually think about it so much. But I found myself thinking about it, and I must have been about 6 or 7 years old. And my mum and my dad were quite poor. We came from quite a financially challenging time, and really it was tough for my mum and my dad. My dad worked in the building trade, but in as a young man in the building trade in Scotland, a lot of workers get laid off in the winter time
Hmm.
when the weather isn't so good, because they're not building as many houses. So my dad had this pattern every year where he would get laid off in November, December before Christmas, and then get hired again in January or something, end of January. So we'd go with a couple of months without wages. And my mum had, because I had three sisters, so we had four kids. My mum was taking these payday loans. Well, I think back then it was slightly more ethical. It was a company called the Provident. We had a man called Tony, the
Uh,
collector. It sounds like the mafia, but it was Tony the collector used to come to our house, lovely man, on a Friday night, and we had a lined book and write Jeanette Hamilton. Aye, my mum has paid, like £1 or £5, whatever it was. She paid, and that was these loans my mum had taken to help us through the Christmas period, and it was very stressful. And I remember this was a very significant moment for me, Seamus, because I remember my mum and my dad had been arguing a wee bit, and then I heard my mum upset, and my sisters and I were upstairs, and I sneaked downstairs, and I listened at the door, and my mum was crying, and she was just so terribly upset about the fact that we were coming to Christmas and she was saying, what are we going to do? Because I don't have any money. And, we've got 4 kids and how am I going to feed them? And David needs a new pair of shoes and Leslie needs a new skirt for school. And what are we going to do? And she was so terribly upset. And I started crying. And I ran up to my bed and I lay in my bed crying. One, out of empathy, compassion for my mum. And two, out of the stark realization that my mum was upset about what she was trying to do for us and that she wasn't going to be able to do. And it really got me thinking about how incredibly kind, what that means. To be kind, to live your whole life where all your focus is on being there for other people. And when I was a kid, all you're really thinking about is yourself. And it's not in a selfish way. Parents want you to think about yourself and just to be happy. That's what they want. But I found myself suddenly thinking about what that meant. And that moment there, I remember deciding I want to be kind like my mum one day. And that moment is probably one of the most profound moments of my childhood, was that specific moment, that formative moment where I intellectually thought about what kindness is and how important it is, and suddenly realized how kind my mum is, and how much she was just doing everything for her family.
Amazing. Absolutely. And that stayed with you, David.
Oh, here I am, 37 years after that time,
Yeah.
and it's still a very powerful memory in my mind.
Well, and thank you for sharing it. It obviously means so much to you, and I appreciate you sharing that. And um, I love in your book, David. I love so many things about your book, and I could wax
Thanks.
lyrically all day about your book. And I think it's a brilliant book. And if I haven't said already, people should go out and purchase this book today and have it beside you every single day as a guidebook for living your life in a beautiful way, going forward. But one of the things you do quite eloquently in the book is that you're not you take a term, a subject called kindness, which could be to some people a very ethereal kind of subject, which actually you concretizes in the field of actual practical research that has been done, actual scientific research that has been done on the subject of scientific evidence to back up what you're saying in terms of kindness. But before we get to the scientific evidence, I suppose you do mention in your book, to start with, and I'm going to hit you with it straight away, that you say kindness is a universal language.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
I just mean that everyone has it within them to be kind, because we're actually supposed to be kind. Believe it or not, we have kind genes. And what I mean by that is the genes that are associated with our capacity for compassion and kindness are so deeply rooted, they're so innate, that they're some of the oldest genes in the human genome. In fact, they're at least 100 million years old, if not, the roots may go back even 700 million years. Now, that is absolutely astronomically ancient. And what that means is the tendency, the capacity for kindness is the deepest thing within us. And no one is without that. We all have that capacity. So it's a universal language that's way more ancient than our verbal language. It's way more ancient. To care for someone or something is way more ancient than any words that we've invented over the last 10 or 15,000 years to describe how we feel. The actual basic act itself, that tendency to care and then act on that tendency is absolutely ancient and universal. And that's really what I meant by that term.
No, so it has no boundaries. It has
No
no
boundaries.
language difficulties. It's universal.
It's a universal language. Everyone understands.
Common to everybody. It's
Yeah.
common to everybody. And I love. I just love. I just love my new word for the latter part of 2024. Since reading this book, David, I have to tell you, is kindfulness. Without a shadow of a doubt. I said to you before we started this recording that I'm going to get a t-shirt printed, a top printed with the word kindfulness on it. and quote you directly underneath. And I suppose for those who may not know what kindfulness is, can you explain to our listeners what, in your opinion, kindfulness looks like and feels like?
So kindfulness it's a fusion of mindfulness with the practice of kindness, whether that's even just as a kind thought. And for people that are not familiar with mindfulness, the most basic form of mindfulness, meditation, for example, is just to be mindful of what breathing is like. So you breathe and you just notice it. So in the noticing what that breathing feels like, what it sounds like, you're now mindful that you're breathing. So the most basic form of mindfulness is that. So what if we introduced, even for a small fraction, even for a minute of a 5-minute mindfulness practice, we just directed some of our attention towards thinking kindly. It might be thinking of a recent experience you had of kindness. It might be thinking of a time recently when you said or did something for someone, or they said or did something to you. Or it might even be thinking of someone you know in life who's having a tough time, and just imagining, just saying like a silent prayer. May you have a nice day. May something really wonderful happen. So some of your attention is directed towards kindness. So if you like, it's mindfulness with a sprinkle or a dash, a sprinkling or a dash of kindness built into it. And so I refer to that as kindfulness. Similarly, another form of kindfulness might be taking that mindset of thinking kindly and applying it to your daily life. So in how you communicate with people. So in other words, you become mindfully kind as you live your life. So whatever you do, basically, however you interact with people, whatever role you have in working in society, do it kindly. So be mindfully kind as you live your daily life. So that's what I mean by kindfulness.
Wonderful, absolutely wonderful, and you're also very clear that while kindness and kindfulness has no boundaries, and no language boundaries, and it's the universal language of humanity. It's also not wrapped up in any one religious practice, right?
No.
It's not contrary to religion, but religious practice or religious belief doesn't really form the basis of your own particular approach.
Yeah.
You do mention the Eightfold Path in terms of Buddhism, in terms of the meditation practices that the
Sure.
Buddhism has experienced and practiced for over 2,000 years,
Yeah.
and that can be worked in. But you take it one step further, right?
Yeah. Basically what I was trying to do in the book, one, first of all, paint kindness as this universal language
Mm,
that really has no boundaries, but also show why we need it in our society. And so when I started the book, when I was talking about kindfulness, what I was really pointing out is that mindfulness practice has become so widespread these days that some Buddhist scholars uh, had started to worry that there might be consequences of mindfulness as a practice as it's known in the West. There
mm,
might be some consequences of that having been removed from its traditional context, because traditionally mindfulness was part of what's called the Eightfold Path. And it's like
yeah.
most religions have a set of guidelines.
Mm,
Like in Catholicism, I grew up as a Catholic, so in Catholicism, it's the Ten Commandments form some of the guidelines. So different religions have different sets of guidelines, but all of these religious and spiritual practices, the guidelines are based in compassion and kindness. They're really just there to help us to lead our lives in a way that's kind and productive to society, that's beneficial. So anyway, coming back to mindfulness, because mindfulness is so widespread in the West, Buddhist scholars had become worried that the way it's taught in the West, it was extracted from the original context, which is really, the Eightfold Path was really a set of guidelines for life
mm.
that help us to think kindly, to speak kindly, to communicate kindly, to be kind in life, so that we can make a positive contribution to society. mindfulness meditation was a small part, one single teaching in that whole context. But it was so helpful in the West. When Westerners started to practice it, it first found a footing in a hospital environment. An academic at the time, John Kabat-Zinn, had demonstrated that it was incredibly helpful to people who were struggling with pain in a hospital environment. And it was so helpful, mindfulness as a technique, without any of the traditional parts. So it had been stripped away from the spiritual connotations, because that wouldn't be right to bring any religious connotations and, you know, even teachings about kindness and compassion into a hospital environment, because you've got vulnerable people here. So we can't be professing morals and ethics. It's just about what's clinically good for them. So it was so helpful. It really became mainstream. It landed really big in the Western world.
Yeah.
So Buddhist scholars had said, well, wait a minute. Originally, it was about kindness and compassion. Might there be consequences? And so when scientists began to study that, they found that mindfulness as a practice stretches us on the inside. But without the original moral compass part of traditional mindfulness, it doesn't stretch us in any one preferential direction. It stretches us in the direction of our existing personality. So kind people who practice mindfulness meditation become even kinder. They stretch in that direction. But people who are more self-focused, self-absorbed, or even low in empathy, stretch in that direction and become even less kind. And that's exactly what the Buddhist scholars had worried about. So what I did with kindfulness in the book there in the first couple of chapters was suggest, what about we tweak mindfulness without bringing the spiritual side of it in, any religious connotation, because most people in the world might be put off because people in the world have lots of different religions. So what about take all that out and just take the core concepts of compassion and kindness and reintroduce them to mindfulness? So when I talked about kindfulness, it was a reintroduction to that well-known practice. It's extremely beneficial to people all over the world, but just sprinkling it with compassion and kindness, just reminding us that that's what we do this for. It's so that we make more of a positive, kind, and compassionate contribution to society.
It's a powerful combination.
Thank you.
It's like the 1-2 for humanity, right?
Yeah.
It really is the 1-2 from humanity.
No, thanks.
And your book was published at a time in our society where we have, I suppose, experienced an awful tragedy in our community, and I'm mindful as somebody who, you know, is keenly aware of the part of the country that you live in, that you know, it must have brought back memories of that tragic day in Dunblane when you know, so many school children were killed at the hands of you know, an awful monster. Really, what would you say to people today, David, based on those experiences? How would you say to people to express kindness more today? What do people need to do? And it's probably difficult.
Yeah, I think when there's so many divisions and separation and polarity and people fighting and arguing with each other, this universal language we have of kindness, I think this is what unites us.
Yeah.
This is a language that crosses these divides, that crosses these bridges, because people, when we fight against each other, we hurt each other, sometimes it's because we're so polar in how we understand the world, or we're lashing against something. And I think the more we embrace kindness, not as a fluffy sentiment, you know, I think a lot of people, one of the things I really wanted to get across in the work that I do is kindness isn't just a fluffy, you know, soft cotton wool kind of thing. It's something that really has powerful effects. We really can bridge these divides sometimes by reaching for empathy. You know, empathy is I feel with you. It's reaching for an understanding of the other person's opinion, the other person's position, before I then communicate. You know, as St. Francis has said, you know, try to be understood. Try to understand before you try to be understood.
Absolutely. Before before the words even leave your mouth,
Yeah,
that there is that connection, isn't there?
absolutely. And empathy is where kindness begins. Seamus, empathy is, I use a little analogy often, that empathy is like a seed that's planted. And the seed, empathy means I feel with you. So what that means is I share your pain.
Yeah,
I understand. I can relate to what you must be going through, whatever you're going through right now. I feel your pain. And in this moment, I am with you
yeah,
100%, and I'm not thinking of anything else. And then that seed begins to grow, and you get a wee stem, and that wee stem's compassion. And what compassion means is I feel for you. So empathy is I feel with you, compassion I feel for you. So a little part of me now, having shared this pain with you, a little part of me is growing out of that and thinking, surely there's something that I could say or do that could help you. I now want you to be free of your pain. So I'm not fully now just with you. I'm with you. I've been with you for a while. I'm now thinking, and now I wonder if I can help you in some way. And that's compassion. And then a wee flower begins to grow on that on top of that wee stem. And that's kindness. That's the act that I now take to help. It might be something that I say, it might be something that I do. So empathy is that point where if you reach for empathy first, you plant the seed that can heal these divides, that can cross these bridges, that can make that difference when we are arguing with each other, when we have these polarities in society where we disagree with each other. Plant the seed first. The seed is, I am willing to understand you, and then we'll see what happens from there. But if I understand you, what will probably happen is a wee flower will grow out of that, and that's the flower of kindness. And
yeah.
so I think that's what we need more, because we all have that seed within us. We all have the ability. And I think, if we do more, practice more kindness in the world, but I realize it's not just a wee fluffy sentiment. It really is, I call it a powerhouse at times, because there's so much positive stuff that can change in our relationships and society, even in our health. I mean, kindness actually physically impacts the heart,
Yeah.
physically impacts the immune system. Kindness literally causes changes inside our blood vessels and inside brain circuits. It's not a fluffy sentiment. It's something tremendously potent and powerful. And I try to get that across, that if we embrace this fully, we really can. That sounds like a big claim, but I really believe kindness can change our world for the better if we
A-
really embrace it.
Absolutely, 100%. And you not only make that claim, but like I say, you back that claim up with really strong, hard scientific evidence
Absolutely.
that's been carried out into the whole subject of kindness. And like you say, it can change our biological disposition. It can change the blood vessels. It can change the wiring in our brain. It literally has the capacity to change our lives. Would you go
Yeah,
too far?
absolutely, 100%. In fact, one of the most amazing things that happen, people often talk about, it'd be great if we can boost our immune system. There was a scientific paper published not so long ago called Kindness in the Blood, high-level scientific study looking at the genetic effects of kindness. And they got people they got one group of people to be kind over a period of, every day over a period of time. And they got other people, and so it was kindness to other people, and they got another group of people just to be the normal selves, and another group of people just to do things for themselves. But the main focus was on what happens when you be kind to others. And they took blood samples, and it turned out they were looking at a particular set of genes that are called CTRA genes, and it's not important what they're for, but basically what they do is they're involved in the immune system's response, the inflammatory response to threat.
Mm.
In other words, when we feel threatened, there's an inflammatory response inside the blood. And what happened is that inflammatory response was massively suppressed. The gene activity was altered. So I'm talking about alterations of the activity of genes in immune cells that are circulating in the human
Oh,
bloodstream. So
wow.
so the immune cells circulating in our blood, and the activity of genes in these immune cells was affected by the act of kindness to another person. And the net effect was a reduction in inflammation in our blood. I mean, isn't that kind of thing, for
It's
me, it's just
incredible.
extraordinary.
It's incredible. It's a
That's
revelation.
extraordinary.
It's a revelation, and it
Yeah,
certainly
yeah.
was a revelation in your book. D- I would say, based on your analogy, then, would you say that the joy of actually giving an F smiley face CK in terms of the book that you've written. It's the instruction booklet for sowing the seeds of kindness, David.
Absolutely. That's what I tried to do with the book is try to balance these fascinating bits of science, like how it affects the immune system, even how kindness not only affects the immune system, but how it actually changes the shape of blood vessels to physically reduce blood pressure. But I tried to balance that with saying, and here's how we do it in our lives. And you don't, and like you said earlier, Seamus, when we first started this chat, that it's not about the big things, is it? It's the small things.
It's the small things.
Because these are the things we do every day. These are the things you don't notice. You know, most of your listeners, Seamus, I'll bet most of your listeners to your podcast frequently throughout the day probably say and do lots of little nice things for people in terms of what they say, how they communicate, little things that they do without giving it another thought. Like you just do it and then you get on with the rest of your day. What you don't see actually is what happens next. You might do something.
It's a ripple.
There's a ripple. There's a ripple effect. It's like dropping a pebble in a pond. You might drop a pebble in a pond and then walk away. What you don't see is it makes a plop and then it makes a wee wave and the wave powers out on the other side of the pond.
Yeah.
There's a wee lily pad doing that. It's rising and falling. It doesn't know why it's rising and falling, but it's rising and falling because of the wave.
Yeah.
And what set the wave in motion was a pebble dropped in a pond. But that's a metaphor for acts of kindness that get dropped, that everybody drops every day into society. You say a few kind words, or you offer someone a little bit of encouragement or support, and then you go on with the rest of your day. What you don't see is what happens next, and what happens next is the wave. And research at Harvard and Yale actually measured the wave of kindness out to what's called 3 degrees of separation. And what that means is if those little bits of encouragement and support that you show today, just because you're a kind person, and then you go on with the rest of your day, that person, because of how you made them feel, will then probably be kind or kinder to someone else. And that someone else is at 1 degree of separation from you. But that someone else will be kind or kinder to another person who's at 2 degrees of separation from you. And that person will be kind or kinder to another person who's at 3 degrees of separation from you. But what we actually know from science is that it isn't just one person. Each person, on average, is kind or kinder to 3 to 5 people.
Yeah.
And what that means is you actually end up with somewhere between 27 and 125 people.
Wow.
At 3 degrees of separation are benefiting from all these little things that you say and your listeners say and do every day that you don't really notice because it's just the things that you do. And I'm pointing out in the book that you do these things, you really are changing the world, and we just don't realize the impact we're having every day. So what I was trying to do in the book is point out that it's the little things that make a difference. And if you need a wee bit of help, here's a few suggestions, here's a few ideas, and here's a few little principles that we can build into our lives that help us just to live this without even thinking about it.
Yeah, and I love the part in your book that really speaks about how we can, genuinely be kind, in our everyday life. But there's also a degree of where it really comes into its own. It is degree of anonymity around kindness, is that we can do random acts of kindness that people won't know who we are. People won't understand why we did it, but it has that effect of ripple that just spreads. That just spreads in the same way. We were shown during the coronavirus epidemic how coronavirus would spread in a room, right? And there was something like 6 or 7 degrees of separation. So if you sneezed in a room, then 6 or 7 or 8 people would be infected with the virus, right?
Yeah.
But you're now telling me that kindness, if we start the ripple, it has 3 degrees of separation.
It's highly contagious.
It's highly contagious.
Highly contagious. I made that point really strongly, that it is one of the most contagious things I've ever come across, Seamus. Kindness.
Yeah, and I love that. I love that as the flip side to, the negative kind of storytelling on viruses and threats.
Yeah.
This is one of the most positive threats I've ever read about.
Absolutely, yeah. It's the most positive, contagious things that I've ever come across. I mean, who'd have thought because we only ever think of contagious things as what I might catch, like a cold or a virus or something. And in actual fact, one of the most potent contagions is kindness. You help someone, and because of how it makes them feel, they're more likely to go help someone else because of how you made them feel. And that is how it becomes contagious. It's because of how you make a person feel, whether it's just relieved in the moment. Sometimes people feel relieved. Sometimes they feel seen, listened to, valued. Sometimes people just feel, oh, that's great, thank you so much. And but whatever it is, we pass it on because we feel moved. It taps into that part of us that knows that helping others is the right thing to do. So we have, and all of a sudden we're inflated, we're elevated a little bit. And the natural tendency then is to pass that on and do something similar for someone else. Someone supports you, you naturally want to go and support someone else. It's just the way we are, because it's our deepest nature is to help other people.
Absolutely. And you write quite candidly in your book as well, David, that kindness is very much based on reality, that it's not a fluffy concept, that it is very much based on reality, that it's real. But you also mentioned that we have a responsibility to ourselves and a responsibility to others, but namely ourselves insofar as if we feel we are being kind and we're getting nothing back, and we find ourselves in positions where, you know, becoming expressing kindness is becoming really difficult. Or if we do express kindness or perform random acts of kindness and nothing comes back from that, or if we're living in situations where it's difficult to live in, you know, you're quite clear that, you know, there's a degree of boundary around that.
Absolutely.
For want of a better word. And the word that comes to mind is boundary, that we need to be really mindful of the energy
100%.
that we give out, right? Do you want to explain a little bit about
Absolutely. You put that so well, Seamus, because there comes a time, and I think everyone is different in life, and we all have a different context, different situations in our life, and there isn't really any one size fits all. And what I tried to get across in the book is sometimes it's easy to be kind, and you get a lot of feedback and a lot of good things happen. But other times, like you pointed out, you can be taken for granted, or there's nothing, and it becomes, depending on the situation, it becomes difficult. And sometimes there's a point where we've got to turn the kindness around and say, I matter as well.
Yeah.
I matter. And this is where the boundary is. It's saying, I've also got to be kind to myself. Because if I'm not kind to myself, then there's not enough of me available. I'll wear out, I'll burn out. There's not enough of me available then with which to help other people. And if I want to keep doing my thing in the world, in my job or caring for my kids, if I'm tiring myself out by keeping doing all this kind to others and getting nothing back, or actually being taken advantage of, then I'm going to burn out. So there's a sweet spot, and I talk about the sweet spot somewhere between being kind to others and looking after your own immediate needs. And that sweet spot, meaning the balance in between, wherever that boundary is different for different people. And it's different for each of us at different times in our life. Sometimes it's way up here, meaning that you've got an abundance of energy and time and resources and with which to be present for and help other people. And you don't really feel you need to charge. It's like you've just charged your phone and you've got like 24 hours of battery or something. But sometimes that boundary is so close here because you're exhausted, you're tired. And it might be things that are happening in your life right now. It might be stuff that has happened that's shaping how you're feeling or how you're responding right now. But at this moment, that boundary is really close. That sweet spot, that balance is so close to home that you've got to say, okay, right now I need to look after my own mental health, my physical health. I've got to find, how do I be kind to myself? How do I practice? First of all, I put a boundary down. But secondly, what do I do? How do I be kind to myself? And if you find a way then to practice self-kindness, it's like plugging yourself into the wall socket and you charge your battery, or you fill up your own cup, to use the analogy that I used. And then as you fill up your own cup, that boundary gets pushed away a wee bit because you've got more energy and more ability, more of yourself available again with which to help other people. Sometimes these situations where people are taking advantage, you can say, okay, I don't need that anymore. I can leave the room. Whatever leaving the room means for us, it can be leaving a situation or whatever it means for each of us, or it could be something else. But if there's more, if I've charged my own battery or filled my own cup, there's more of me available with which to be here for others. So what I actually did in that chapter of the book, it's actually the longest chapter of the book because I found there was so much that needed to be said.
Yeah.
That there's loads of different ways we can be kind to ourselves. Some of the simplest things we can do is just take time for ourselves. And you know what I do is I'm one of these people that find it difficult to say no. And it's because, and I think a lot of people are like that because we naturally care. And I noticed that if ever someone needs my help, whether it's family or friends, I'll always find the time. Always. Sometimes I even move things in my diary and put a note in my diary. So what I found was a really good way of elevating the need for self-kindness, for self-care, was to put a note in my diary that says meeting with self.
I love that.
And it
I
might just,
love that.
oh, thanks. It might just be 10 minutes or 15 minutes. It might be half an hour. It might be an hour. It's not unknown for me when I've needed to fill my own cup to watch an episode of Star Trek in the middle of the day.
Yeah, I was coming to that, David. I
Yeah,
was coming to that.
yeah,
And
yeah,
as a
yeah,
fellow Trekkie myself, you know, I was trying to work in ways where I could bring your book into the analogies and the script of Star
yeah.
Trek.
Of Star
You
Trek,
know,
yeah.
and kindfulness is all about exploring new worlds,
Absolutely.
to boldly going where you know you've not gone before,
Absolutely.
to walk into the deep grass and see what you find.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
and I suppose if you were Captain Kirk, right, and you were standing on the bridge of the Enterprise and you were speaking to your crew, David,
Yeah.
about going to this planet called kindfulness, how would you speak to your crew? What would you tell them? How would you introduce the subject, and what would you tell them to enable them to understand?
Well, no, Seamus, that's probably one of the best questions I've ever been asked in my life. And
Okay.
and probably the most unique question I've ever
Yeah.
been asked in my life. I suppose as the captain of the ship, what I'd be making sure I was doing is leading with kindness.
Yeah.
So I'd be making sure that everyone in my crew has their needs met and that everyone is understood, that everyone is listened to. If someone has an opinion, it's listened to and everyone feels listened to. They feel valued in their job. I'd make sure that my crew, as we are journeying to this place called kindness, I'd make sure that everyone feels that they're a valuable part of the team, that realize that every one of our roles matter and we're all helping each other. We're a team. And sometimes some of us feel strong in the team and we need to help others in the team, but that we understand that we're a team. And I'd make sure that everyone feels respected, and I'd make sure that I communicate in a way. Yes, sometimes a leader has to make a decision, say we have to do such and such a thing, but I'd make sure that I do it with empathy and that I understand people's opinions and needs as we travel along the way.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Absolutely wonderful. And it is a journey, right?
It is a journey. It
It
is.
is a journey,
We
right?
might we might not always get it right, but
No.
we can at least try. Because I mean, I think the journey of learning kindfulness, whatever environment, whether it's as leader of a ship or leader of a team, or whether it's just how we live our lives, it is a journey. And we might not always get it right because we're human, and that's part of self-kindness, is allowing yourself to be human and don't give yourself a hard time if you don't get it right. Because there's loads of, in fact, Seamus, someone asked me a wee while ago, quite recently, has researching and writing about kindness made me a kinder person?
Mm.
And the answer to that is absolutely right. But for two reasons. One, immersing myself in thoughts of it has made me more alert to it. But the other thing that it's done is it's made me aware of where I fall short. By thinking about kindness so much, I've noticed where I don't manage all that well. Because, I'm human and I have my own stressors. I have things that have happened in my life that are happening that that sometimes muddy the waters a bit, and it makes it harder to see clearly, and it
Mm.
makes it harder to find that stable base inside. We all do it, and I think for me, realizing where I fall short has made me a kinder person. And I think by immersing myself in the science of kindness and in writing about it and researching it and speaking about it, it literally has made me aware of the times where I think, next time I think I can do better, and I will. And I'm aware of where I didn't do so well and what I could do better. And that's what I mean by it's a journey. And the journey is one of becoming more who you aspire to become. Then I
Yeah.
guess the next highest version of yourself.
I love that. I love that. And I suppose, it's all about constant and never-ending improvement, isn't it?
That's it. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what makes the difference. David, it's been an absolute pleasure this afternoon, mate. You have brightened a Friday afternoon for me. You have filled my podcast with joy and kindness and kindfulness.
Well,
For
thanks, Seamus.
for those of you who have, for some reason, not got out and bought David's book, I would say get it today, download it today, both the audio and manual and the printable book is available on Amazon. You can get it on David's own website, and links will be underneath. I will also put the book on my own website, where a link will be made available to David's selling page on Amazon at seamuscorry.co.uk. David, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on board today.
The pleasure's been all mine, Seamus. I've thoroughly enjoyed what felt really just like a chat. It's been really lovely. So thanks so
Great.
much for helping me to bring this subject to more people.
Absolutely, and I wish you well in terms of your own journey, David. And as captain of the Starship Kindfulness, I'm very much on board.
Captain of the Starship Kindfulness. I love that.
All right, and you can have that
Can
one.
I have that? Oh, thanks, Seamus.
You can have that one. You can quote that in your next
Brilliant.
presentation. All
I
right.
love that. That is brilliant.
And I wish you well, David, both with the book, with your journey, with your work. And I just want to do a very quick shout out. Thank you to Suzanne Baines, who initially made the connection between me and you and introduced you to me. And I today celebrate Suzanne's work, and I know Susie is, for want of a better word, a devout fan and follower of yours in terms of in her own work.
And she's a thoroughly kind person.
She is thoroughly kind, and if I can be half as kind as Susie is, I'll be doing something right in my life. And I want to extend kudos to Susie today, and our work with you matter always. David, thank you ever so much, and have a wonderful rest of the day. And it's been great having you on board. All right.
Thanks, Seamus. Same to you. Take care.